I'm going to talk about my dissertation on, it was titled Mapping the Role of Heritage in Woolwich's Socio-Economic Regeneration. Just as a very quick overview, I'm going to talk about my dissertation. I'll talk a bit about the context and the rationale behind it, the methodology, and then also a quick run through the key findings. In terms of the background and the context, I began this dissertation almost exactly 12 months ago, and in really unusual circumstances, and was faced with the prospect of trying to undertake the dissertation without access to libraries, no opportunities for primary data collection. And so I wanted to really kind of turn this into an opportunity and focus on what could be done with secondary data collection, heavily focusing on what was available online, and also what was published as part of national statistics and from sources such as the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, and other accessible data sets that I could get hold of. And my interest and my background has always been in heritage-led regeneration. That was one of the key motivations for applying to this course. And what I wanted to do was to be able to examine the role of heritage within regeneration. And as Calliope mentioned, that the course's association with Woolwich and the ongoing research there provided an opportunity to focus this interest. And so to give a bit of a background to Woolwich itself, it's a southeastern district of London, approximately 30 kilometres from the centre. It has pre-Roman origins as a distinct town within itself. As you can see from this early Ordnance Survey map, I think from the 17th century, has always been quite a distinct area away from the centre of London itself. In the 16th century, it was established as a royal arsenal by the crown. Large tracts of land were given over to the military and naval industries, and this really grew up until the 19th century when it was a substantial military complex specialising in shipbuilding and the development of new weaponry. And what this brought with it, as what historians describe, a rich social mix, which composed of a highly skilled artisan elite, highly skilled labour force within the area. But as with any town or any area that's quite dependent on any single industry, it was quite vulnerable to changes within that industry. And in the 20th century, the relocation of this military complex away from Woolwich and those associated industries also meant that it led to a subsequent decline in the 20th century. And that sets the context for the recent regeneration of Woolwich in the last 2 decades. And since the 1990s, when the military site left, it has been the focus of a number of regeneration initiatives, and this was part of the challenge of the dissertation, was to be able to distinguish this and identify what role heritage had within these different processes that were ongoing. So this included the acquisition of the housing site by 2 large housing developers, Barratt Homes and Berkeley Homes, and in total these will deliver over 3,000 new homes once it is complete, and it's still ongoing over 2 decades. Another really important aspect of its regeneration as well is the arrival of a new transport system, the multi-billion-pound Crossrail link, which will turn it into a very direct commuter town, and transport into the centre of London will be possible within a very short amount of time. So as I mentioned, my approach needed to be focused on the use of secondary data. And so the first thing I did was to establish an analytical framework. I wanted to understand what was possible in terms of data collection, what was out there, but also what was relevant to this idea of both wider socio-economic regeneration and heritage-led regeneration. And this focused on 3 main types of data: heritage itself, designated heritage within Woolwich, from sources such as Historic England and UNESCO, population and demographics from ONS and the census, as many of us will have completed recently, and then also data on living conditions. So something called the indices of multiple deprivation, which I'll talk about a bit later, house prices and employment. But before I could start collecting data, all from my desk and locked down within the context of the pandemic, I needed to establish a relevant spatial definition of what we meant by Woolwich and what we meant by the impact area of regeneration. And so I drew upon this geographic concept of distance decay. In very simple terms, it's the further away you are from something, the less influence it has over you or over the cultural and other economic kind of processes as well. And to illustrate that, this is quite a busy map, so I apologise. And also, this is one of many maps as well, hence the title. I was able to use GIS software to kind of plot travel time distances. So each of those lightly shaded purple and pink areas represents a travel distance. These are based on how far you can travel to or from the centre of Woolwich based on a 10-minute drive time, a 10-minute walking time, and a 15-minute walking time. I also was able to identify a recent experimental data set from Ordnance Survey who've been tasked with trying to map all of the high streets within England, and trying to identify and map what we mean by town centre and a high street has also been a challenge. And so that's what we can see with these blue dots along here. And then the grey lines represent boundaries of the local authority, and then something called lower super output areas, which I'll talk about in more detail a little later So having used the GIS analysis and that 10-minute walking or 15-minute walking time distance, I was able to focus on or develop that spatial definition of what I meant by the impact area. What was useful about that approach is that it takes into account geographic features such as the River Thames, which acts as a natural boundary to the north, and also road networks and street layout that really identifies areas that are feasibly walkable within that certain time. And then, as I mentioned, I needed this to be able to identify relevant lower super output areas. Now, these are administrative boundaries that are developed based on an approximate definition of around 10,000 households, and this is how the census is carved up. So there's an LSOA that covers every inch of the UK, and it's a way of kind of being specific and collecting data geographically. And this formed the basis of my data collection and analysis. So quickly talking through some of the findings. Once I've got this area definition of the impact area, I was able to draw in various bits of data. So again, it's quite a busy map, but the blue triangles represent listed buildings. We also have something called conservation areas, and other types of designated heritage. And I was able to understand where they are in context to the town centre, the Royal Arsenal site, as I mentioned, being an important feature within the town, but also Power Street being the main town centre and High Street. And so we can see quite a significant amount of designated assets, both concentrated within the High Street and the Royal Arsenal itself. The green boundary represents the opportunity area that, as I mentioned, was designated by the GLA and the focus of a lot of regeneration. And also the red boundary represents a heritage action zone, which is a forthcoming regeneration initiative, which I'll talk about a little later. But I think the key takeaway from this is that there is quite a wealth of designated heritage sites within Woolwich itself. What I haven't shown is how this compares to maritime Greenwich, a few kilometres away to the east, where there is significantly more designated heritage and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But Woolwich itself as well has plenty of assets, so to speak. So moving on to some of the population and demographic data. Again, having that definition, having those LSOAs allowed me to draw upon historic census data. And what was really impressive was that the census data going back all the way to 1801 has been digitized for the whole of London. And so this really gives us a good trajectory and understanding of Woolwich's fortunes over the years. This small, the blue line represents Woolwich, the borough of Greenwich, and the orange other London boroughs. You can't break it down specifically down to Woolwich, but what we can see is Woolwich within the borough of Greenwich, and in the 1860s, an increase associated with the growth of the Royal Arsenal in the Crimean War, but then also the subsequent decline during the Second World War, when the military industry started to move out of London. So we see it declining ahead of other London boroughs, and it was also slower to recover. But now we see it at a point in 2011 where it almost caught up, and that kind of sets the context and the understanding of what we mean by the regeneration and the recovery of Woolwich in recent decades. Turning now to population and demographics, what I was able to do is really pin down where some of that growth was taking place. So that I'm looking at the LSOAs here on the left-hand side, we can see index growth or population growth within the LSOAs themselves, and we can see a huge growth within one area in particular, and this is where the new housing development has taken place. So along the riverside and around where these new developments from Berkeley Homes and Barratt Homes have taken place. I was able to look also at the age groups of the population, and what we see is this really large kind of group around here, grouped in the age 20 to 40 age ranges, and this again corresponds with what we'd expect with a large amount of inward migration. Migration is an age-selective process, and young adults being more likely to travel and to migrate and more economically mobile. So moving on quickly to indices of multiple deprivation, as I mentioned before. So this is a composite data set. It's produced by a government organisation, and it pulls together a wide range of individual data sets to produce this index. It covers everything from housing, education, skills, health and employment. So it's a really useful composite measure of living conditions within Woolwich itself. What it does is it ranks them respectively into deciles. So if a number 1 means it's in the comparatively most deprived area in the whole of the UK, 10 being the least deprived. And what we can see here is, again, around corresponding where the housing development around the Royal Arsenal has been, there's not only a distinction in 2015 on the left-hand side, less deprived areas in the site of the Royal Arsenal, but also comparing it to 2019, they've become even less deprived over time as well. So again, fitting in with this idea of change and regeneration, we can see where it's happening within the Woolwich area itself. And interestingly, the other areas surrounding Woolwich town centre and in the impact area don't appear to have changed significantly, not in quite the same way as it has done where the real focus of that housing development has taken place. Turning attention now to house prices, and what we can see, I'll start by talking about the right-hand side. I've been able to plot median house price for the Woolwich impact area. And what we can see is growth really outstripping the rest of London and England as well from about the early 2000s, and then a real pickup around 2013 and 2014, and that corresponds with the announcement and the arrival of the of Crossrail. And also looking at a snapshot in 2019, we can again see where a lot of this house price growth has been concentrated. And unsurprisingly, as the theme will be with throughout, that a lot of that has been focused in the Royal Arsenal site, with some of those house price sales, the median being at £500,000. Just a note, where this says 0 on this map, that means there was no data available for that year. But a clear concentration and trend within the Royal Arsenal site. And a look now at employment. So I was able to draw official data, official statistics on employment groups. So this is these categories are broad industrial group. I'll summarize by saying on the left-hand side, a lot of these are associated with the traditional industries. We've got manufacturing, we've got mining, quarrying, transport, and this is the change between 2015 and 2018. What we see on the right, though, is a real growth in more of the retail and services, which broadly tracks the change in the UK economy over a number of decades. But it's interesting to see this at such a local level within Woolwich, and especially the growth in the arts, entertainment, recreation and other services, which was something I really wanted to delve into, but was difficult to find data that really broke this down further. But this corresponds with some of the findings I'll talk about around Woolwich being pitched as a cultural hub and a cultural centre as part of its regeneration. So to summarize the role, I've really had to condense this down quickly. Some of the findings and for the role of heritage is that it had quite a complex kind of role within wider regeneration initiatives. But one really prominent feature, as we've seen and discussed throughout, is the role of heritage and its adaptive reuse. So we see here the former Royal Arsenal Grand Store. It's a Grade 2 listed building as part of that military complex. I believe it's an 18th century building. We see it in 1998, dilapidated, completely transformed originally from its industrial use in 2016 to a new residential setting. It's been carefully sort of landscaped with its nice, tidy public realm, a real visible transformation. Another key theme, as I mentioned, is the role of heritage within placemaking. So this is an architectural render of the Royal Laboratory of Woolwich Arsenal site. And it's a bit, I found through some of the more qualitative review and research to kind of contextualize the quantitative analysis, the role of the heritage sites, pitching Woolwich as a unique place and really playing on its identity as a local historic area, a town separate from London, and trying to position it as a distinct and attractive place for new incoming people to move to, essentially. But it also interestingly raised a couple of questions around, and that concentration of growth within the Royal Arsenal, but the lack of evidence around it reaching out to wider impact areas, and that really concentrated regeneration. It raised the question about heritage for whom, and also it raised an interesting question about built heritage versus intangible cultural heritage. And the evidence through the literature review and through the more qualitative evidence was that focus on built heritage as being a really visible and aesthetic approach to utilizing the uniqueness of heritage and Woolwich's history. What there was less of was an emphasis on more wider definitions of what counts as heritage and the wider heritage values. And so in Paris Street, and this is Bereford Square, where the market is located, there is a new regeneration initiative called the High Street Heritage Action Zones, which focuses more on civic buildings. It's more in response to the consumer behavior changes away from traditional retail. But it's located away in the town centre. It has an element called the cultural programme that will be focusing on more day-to-day activities such as the market square and so forth. And so this is only just about to launch, but it's an interesting way of capping this research and understanding that there seem to be different types of heritage or roles for heritage within the regeneration of Woolwich. So I think this dissertation was able to sort of really quantify and identify some of the real change and what was happening in regeneration. It was quite novel in the way that it was able to define and collect data and deal with the real challenge of being able to collect or the lack of primary data, which is in the real world context always difficult. It's expensive and the timing is often really difficult. So making use of existing information and looking at heritage and regeneration in a slightly different way. And I'll stop there and I'll bring my presentation to a close. So hopefully that was interesting.